Hey, everybody. Welcome to tonight's webinar. I'm so excited to have you here. So excited to be chatting with you with my friend and colleague and coworker, Dr. Gina. And I'm going to let everybody trickle in for a moment. Usually on these times when we start right at 5, people will trickle in. So as you guys are trickling in, let me make sure my chat is totally active here. As you guys are trickling in, if you guys could type in the chat for me, and I might have to reclaim host for a second. So if you guys could type in the chat for me, where you're from and what you are hoping to learn tonight, because we want to make sure that we are really orienting this to what is best for you. So 2 things: where you're from, what you're hoping to learn tonight, and then we can make sure that we are orienting this to whatever is best for you guys to learn. So I'm going to go ahead and launch us off on our kind of our overview of what tonight's about. And then Dr. Gina and I will tell you a little bit about why we are passionate about this topic. And we'll get into the nitty gritty of tonight's content on chronic fatigue and brain fog. So we're going to talk about some of the top root causes of fatigue and brain fog. So common, right? That people come in and they're told over and over again that they're normal or that their labs are generally normal. And it's very common that we see that people are told that they've had everything tested that needs to be tested, right? And that's so not true from a functional root cause perspective. So when you're going through this material and you're listening to this, one of the things to be listening for is, what am I missing? Right? There are going to be some things that you know about. There are going to be some things that you're like, oh, yeah, I've probably had that tested before, but the goal is for us to help find those missing links, right? That's part of what we're doing here tonight. So we really want to make sure. So I would orient in your mind to that. So, oops, that should say we. We will cover one of these 5 really thoroughly. So we're going to go through these. We only have you guys for a short amount of time tonight. Dr. Gina and I were just talking about offline about how we could actually spend like so much time going off about all these topics. So we're not going to be able to do that because we can't keep you guys here till next week. So we're going to give you kind of that brief rundown of some of the high level things, and then basically give you stuff at the end of how you wind up getting more information. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Dr. Gina here, but what I'm going to do here is in the chat, I'm going to put this link. So if you guys did not get this downloadable handout, then make sure you get this, because that is going to have information on it. It's going to help you follow along. And if you turn it in, then we give you a surprise bonus. And go ahead, Dr. Gina, why don't you tell us
Awesome.
why you're so passionate about this and that?
Yeah. So I'm Dr. Gina DeTully. I was very classically educated. I went to the Uniformed Services University, which is a very classical MD program. And then I got into practice and I had 15-minute visits, which was enough time for me to say, okay, here's your diagnosis, here's your pill, get out of my office, which did not work because they would just come back to me later on and need more medicine and they weren't doing any better. And I thought, something's not right here, but I didn't actually do anything about it until I got an up close and personal experience with chronic fatigue. Found myself unable to get off the couch, unable to work, but we'll talk more about that later.
Amazing. Thank you. Yeah, there's I think we find so much, and so many of the people we see at my Lyme doc, it's like looking for people that have gone through this stuff before, and, validation and all of that sort of stuff. And, like you, it's like I had my own bout with it where so fatigued and I was like memory loss, forgetting where I was living, like pain so bad I thought my leg was being sawed off. So it's a huge part of why we're doing, what we're doing here. So I'm so glad to be working with you and all of this. And you guys, Dr. Gina will share with you, like she said, more of her story here in a little while, as just some good information on like how we can recover and the process she took and those sorts of things. So to get into some of the nitty gritty, right? So hopefully you got your worksheet. What we're going to do is go through these one by one. So this is one of your first worksheet answers, which is one of the root causes, root cause number 1. What is root cause number 1? And it's chronic hidden infections. And I feel like COVID and that whole, the whole COVID craze, the whole crazy scenario with COVID, one of the things that it did, one very small silver lining in that mess, was it did bring a lot more awareness to infections and to the long, it's like the long haul scenario that we talked about with COVID. And COVID's not what I'm talking about here. COVID is something we could talk about in the chronic hidden infection world. But what COVID really did was it started this conversation more in the public that some of us in functional medicine have been talking about for a long time, which is these chronic hidden pathogens. We call them stealth pathogens. And that's because, from a standpoint of stealthiness, what these infections are really good at is going and hiding, right? They're good at going and hiding. And when they hide in our cells. And one of the things that will happen is oftentimes these basic blood work panels that we do are negative because these stealth pathogens will go in and out of activity. So they'll go into this dormant state. When they're dormant, what tends to happen is people might have a time period, maybe it's a day, maybe it's a week, where all of a sudden they're like, oh, I think I'm getting better. And then all of a sudden they come out of dormancy and you feel really bad again. And this is like the most mind-boggling thing when we have this chronic stealth infection, because what I find people do is they start going through like, well, did I eat something different? Did I sleep different? What did I do different? Was it the exercise? Was it the fact that I had pizza 3 nights ago? Was it the gluten? And of course, some of those things can be impactful to us, and we want to take those into consideration. But oftentimes, it's not those things, it's these underlying types of infections that are coming in and out of hiding. And the other thing that stealth pathogens will do is a lot of them have tails. We call them flagellas in medicine. And with these tails, they will like literally basically think of it as like swimming around the body, they'll relocate. And so, in that scenario, you might have problems in one body part one day, and then it's like it seems completely unrelated, because then there's going to be problems in another part another day. And an area where I see people completely lose their mind on this is, okay, we have a headache one day, so we go to see a neurologist, and the next day the headache's not there as much, and maybe it's joint pain, so then we end up at the rheumatologist, and we're constantly going from like doctor to doctor chasing symptoms, when there's this fundamental thing that is tying the whole picture together that really gets lost in it. Right. And so then your next worksheet answer is telling you about some of these common stealth pathogens. Like these are ones that we see come up a lot. This is by no means a complete list, right? These are the top ones that we see come up over and over and over again. So Borrelia, which is Lyme disease. And the thing to know about Lyme disease, if you guys have tested yourself, because I imagine some of you guys have, is that the standard tests on the market are missing a lot of Lyme disease. And that's because there's about a dozen species that will actually cause Lyme disease. And the standard tests are only looking for one of those species. So we really want to be careful too. It's like the test comes down to the quality of the test that's done, the fact that the right test is ordered, and then of course the nature of the quality of training of whoever that is interpreting the test. So there's way more to it than just like the test. So what I don't want you guys to do is like read this or hear this and then be like, I'm going to go get Lyme tested and think that it's negative. Maybe it is, but you want to make sure you have the right test. So hidden viruses can do this. Bartonella can do this. Toxoplasma. Toxoplasma is a parasite. This parasite is found in a lot of different ways. It's cat urine is a common way people get this, but it's also an undercooked meat. And it's estimated in research that 80% of 80-year-olds have toxoplasma. And that's because we have so much exposure to it, right? It's not because, oh, immune system's down. It's because it's so many exposures over so many lives. And eventually anybody, because it's so ubiquitous, it's everywhere in the world. And so the likelihood that we're going to eventually get this is really high. And I've seen situations where people have like constant chronic pain and we treat them for toxo, and then all of a sudden the chronic pain just completely goes away. So absolutely want to consider that as well. And then H. pylori. And H. pylori, I was actually just talking to a client about H. pylori before this call. H. pylori is super interesting because H. pylori is one of these things. The common test for it is the breath test. It's not a bad test, but it doesn't always catch H. pylori. We can also test for it in the stool, so it's good to have check and balances. But H. pylori, you really want to get this one quantified. And by quantified, like not just telling positive, negatives, you want to know the level of quantity that is actually there, because there can be certain quantities that are still like under the radar of where you would typically diagnose with somebody as a problem, but they could actually be leading to things like gastrointestinal ulcers or food malabsorption where you're not absorbing nutrients. So H. pylori, we put this one on here in part because when we're talking fatigue, when we're talking brain fog, we have to talk about nutrients, right? There's so many nutrients that go to the brain to give the brain energy, choline being one of the major ones. There's so many nutrients that go to the cells to give the cells energy, magnesium and CoQ10 and carnitine and alpha lipoic acid. So all these things, oftentimes people will read online like, I need energy or I need better brain function. And they'll put themselves on these things when the fundamental underlying reason they're actually deficient is because of some sort of chronic hidden low grade infection. So that's kind of the breakdown on some of the top things. Like I said, there's obviously more infections we can talk about than this, but these are some of the top ones that I want to make sure that you guys are thinking about. And if you've done all these, still consider the fact that there's still plenty more talk or plenty more infections that we can test you for. We just don't have time tonight to talk about every possible infection out there. So this was our client Rose. Rose had when she came to the office, she was a complete wreck. She was barely functioning. She had to quit her job. She had moved multiple places. She left her state where she was from. She's from Texas, and she left her state because of just how she was doing and needing to move to a different environment. And when we first found her, when she first came to the office, the number of different things from infections, from toxins, it's a laundry list of things, right? And she's like most of our clients that has gone through specialist after specialist after specialist, can't get the right diagnosis, can't find the root cause. And that's why, in part why we're doing what we're doing is because the idea is stop the leak, right? Find that plug. And we find that plug by saying, what are the tests that are missing? It's like so many people I find sometimes come and they're like, what do I do to treat brain fog? What is that supplement? And there's not you can read online and it'll be like, oh yeah, use this to improve brain function, use this to help with energy. I see the same, the weight loss community is classic for that. Use that to lose weight. Nothing's going to work unless we actually figure out what the thing is, right? So if you take CoQ10 for energy because you're fatigued, but your body already has enough CoQ10, you're just going to make your urine and stool expensive because you're going to you're going to excrete that CoQ10 out because you don't need it. That's not the fundamental reason for the fatigue. So many people come in and are looking for that magical supplement. It's not a magical supplement. It's a magical root cause. It's a magical test that's going to tell us where that leak is. So that's why we're focused on that for this particular webinar. And then I will let Dr. Gina talk about root cause number 2. And I'm not seeing anybody post in the chat. So please tell us, you guys, what you want to learn today, where you're from.
Yeah, we'd love to hear it. So, sleep obviously very important, but what's interesting is that, some of our patients will say, but I'm sleeping 8 hours a night, I should be good. But that's the thing, is that sleep quality is very different from sleep quantity. So, sleep quality can be impacted by all sorts of things, stress, medications, chronic infections, as well as our anatomy. And that's a big problem that we are seeing more and more in our society. Is It's not unusual nowadays for people to be sleeping with their mouths open or to have sleep apnea, where their throat actually closes up and they don't get enough oxygen, and so their body constantly wakes them up because you're not getting enough oxygen. You wake up and then you fall back asleep, and then a few minutes later it happens again. And some of these people are waking up like upwards of 50 to 70 times a night. Well, if you do that, you are not going to feel good, right? And your body's not going to be able to repair from some of these chronic infections. And, Dr. Diane talked about this, is a lot of times with our patients, it's not one thing. It does not tend to be just, yep, you've got this and you're good. It tends to be just this cascade before the body really starts breaking down. And sleep is one of those that we see. And it's very interesting in that with sleep apnea, we're seeing it more and more, and there's a few reasons for that. One is our nutrition. One is toxins, and one is it's not cool to breastfeed anymore. And so if infants are breastfed, they're not breastfed for very long, and so the jaw does not develop properly. So if you actually look at pictures, you can actually see from 100 years ago, their jaws are much wider than pictures of people today. It's fascinating. But that is really important because if your jaw is not wide enough and you sleep on your back, your tongue goes back and it blocks that airway. And you may not even realize it. You may not even realize that your sleep is so bad, but that can cause all sorts of fatigue and brain fog and weight gain and high blood pressure and all sorts of problems. So that is a really important thing that we make sure that sleep is optimized, that you are getting that REM sleep, you are getting that deep sleep. Mouth taping is one of the strategies that we can use. There are also oral appliances that we can do. There's a lot of stuff we can do, but this is a crucial component because if you are not treating this, you're not going to get better.
Amazing. And here's your worksheet answer.
I love these tests. We get the right answer. It's
Right,
great.
exactly. We can't lose. It's so good.
Right?
All right,
All
root
right.
cause number 3.
All right, so let's talk hormones. Okay, so there are a lot of different kinds of hormones in the body, and the body regulates them very closely. And in our society, they tend to get off. And, there's a reason for that because we have a lot of toxins in our society, and we have a lot of things in our food supply and our water supply that are hormone disruptors. BPA's in plastics, and now everything's BPA free, but the stuff they replaced it with is just as bad. They just haven't done the studies on it. So it really causes a lot of problems. And also, we find that those chronic infections are going to impact the hormones as well. So I want to go through some of the, I think it's the next slide, some of the different types of hormones that are going to be affected here. So you've heard of the adrenal glands. They sit right on top of the kidneys. And the adrenal glands actually produce a whole ton of hormones. There's like 10 of them. But the one you've probably heard of the most, and the one we see a lot as a problem, is cortisol. So cortisol is your fight or flight hormone. It's really the hormone you need to get up in the morning. Without cortisol, they just can't get up. But what we see is not necessarily strict just deficiency of cortisol. What we see is dysregulation. So, the cortisol may be high when it's not supposed to be high and low when it's not supposed to be low. Or, it may be chronically running high or chronically running low. And this can have a huge impact on energy. It can have a huge impact on sleep. And unfortunately, and as a conventional provider, I can definitely tell you this, is the tests that we have for adrenal dysfunction, they're not very good. I can tell you if you have a strict deficiency with that test, but I can't tell you more than that. So if you have a dysregulation and you're still producing cortisol, I would tell you as a conventional doc, you're normal, you're fine. And that's not true. And so we have specialized tests that we do to really dig into this and find out what is that cortisol rhythm, what's going on there, and stress can really impact this. So, this is another thing we work on with getting the adrenals healthy. And then the next one, sex hormones. We've all heard of testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, DHEA, and we see this a lot, especially in perimenopausal, postmenopausal women. But men, we also see testosterone deficiency too. And again, we have these hormone disruptors in our environment. And so we are seeing so much more of this. that shouldn't be happening. But we also see, medications like birth control are going to be affecting the sex hormones. And, we definitely will see this affect energy. So, that's another thing that we're really looking at. And then sleep hormones. So the one you're probably familiar with is melatonin. And you can take melatonin, over the counter supplements. But the body is very specific in how it releases melatonin. And so, as functional docs, what we like to do is we like to look at the root cause instead of just go, oh, you're not sleeping well, here's some melatonin. That's not a great strategy. And it doesn't mimic what the body's actually doing. And so that's important. And then there's another one that's related to kind of some of the infections that we treat. It's called melanocyte stimulating hormone. And this one can get affected from some of these infections, and it can wreck your sleep. So another cause that, nobody's testing for, they wouldn't even know. And that could just ruin your sleep, and you'd be getting no deep sleep and just not restorative sleep. So, really, really important there. And then thyroid. Oh my goodness. I don't know how many arguments I've had with conventional docs over thyroid. So with thyroid, we have the conventional range of thyroid hormone levels, and then we have the functional range. And they're conventional medicine's catching up very, very slowly, but they are catching up. They're starting to lower the thresholds and realize, oh, people don't feel good when they have a TSH of 6. But the other thing that I see is that they will order just a TSH. And they're like, okay, we're doing thyroid. Well, that's great, except that I need to know your free T4, which is the inactivated version, or your free T3, which is the activated version of thyroid hormone. So the thyroid stimulating hormone is just the hormone that says, hey, I need more thyroid hormone or I need less. So that's great, but it doesn't always correlate to what's actually happening in the body. We have some people who will have okay T4, but they don't convert it to T3, which is the active part, and it's not going to work well. They're not going to feel good. We see a lot of autoimmunity with thyroid, and we also see a lot of just really sluggish thyroids, and that's probably those toxins and chemicals in the environment that are making our thyroid so it doesn't work well. Gut stuff will also make it so the thyroid doesn't work well. So this is really important, and the way we treat it is a little bit different too. I'm not a huge fan of here, let's let your body destroy your thyroid gland, and then we'll give you Synthroid. It'll be great. Gosh, that makes me crazy. We obviously want to treat root causes. We don't want your body destroying itself. And there are ways for us to get your immune system back to where it should be. And so it's not doing that. So I think we have a new answer coming up here.
We do. Worksheet answer. Next one
All
is
right.
proper thyroid testing needs these 3 things at a minimum. And I just want to emphasize something you said, because I think this is so important, which is like the idea of really getting to that root where it's like, okay, well, we're talking about thyroid. So many people, it's so easy, like to just be like, take Synthroid, like you said. And oh my goodness, like it's maddening, because if it's, say, toxic metals that are destroying the thyroid, right? And it's like, well, yeah, you can have Synthroid and maybe your thyroid levels return to normal. A lot of times they don't, but it's not fixing the underlying reason, which is then moving on to another area from a standpoint of fatigue and brain fog. Maybe it's like destroying the brain, maybe it's destroying the mitochondria, which are the energy producing parts of the cell. So, and you guys, I know some of you guys, I know probably have been following my work for a while. There's usually 1 or 2 people on the call that have, but I wanted to bring Dr. Gina on to make sure everybody has a chance to start to getting to know her more too, because I've been working with her. I think it's been almost like 4 or 5 years now since we initially started working together. It's been through a couple of different companies. And one of the things that you guys are probably picking up on with Dr. Gina is that it's like the most amazing thing ever clinically to have a MD that knows all like the good parts of conventional medicine, but also then knows all the good parts of functional medicine and the parts of, where both of these kind of modalities have their limitations. So that's why I wanted everybody to have, start having more of an opportunity to get to know one of my, most exciting team members that I have at my office. So moving on to our next one, our root cause number 4 and our worksheet answer here is a defect in the ability to metabolize or process toxins. And so whenever I talk about this, the number one thing people think is like, oh, she's talking about the mother effer gene, right? And everybody loves to call MTHFR that bad word gene. In fact, I actually had a conversation about like that gene today with patients. It comes up almost every single day when it comes to detox because what you read online is that you can't detox with it. And that's not entirely true. Like, essentially, when we are saying a defect in our ability to process toxins, we are talking about so much more than that one gene. There are so many different ways our body can have abnormalities. So it could be a defect in our ability to process mold. It could be a defect in our ability to process metals. It could be the folate gene, which is the bad word gene, right? The MTHFR gene. There's so many different ways, but the body can have these defects, and the body has check and balance mechanisms. So this mother effer gene, right, the MTHFR that people talk about, that its job is to activate folate. So its job is if you take folate from your food, it will activate it into its usable form, and we need that form to detox. But the body does have some backup ways that it can actually do this. So it's not like the only way we can detox. If it was the only way we could detox and somebody had this gene, we need to detox, right? We got to get toxins out. If we couldn't detox at all, things would get a lot worse. So it's not it's not ideal, right? It's not ideal, but there's also so many other pieces of the picture with detox. And when I'm really talking about, and we're really talking about the process here of breaking down toxins, there's so many different things. One person, we can test for this stuff, right? So there's tests that will tell us, and they're very cool. So they can tell us like very specifically, is it mold? Is it glyphosates? If it's pesticides, is it herbicides? If it's plastics, BPAs, whatever it is specifically that we have a genetic anomaly. Like, I do not break down most pesticides, and I've tested for that. I was suspicious of that because I started noticing somewhere in my teenage years that I could start tasting what I thought it might be pesticides. I didn't know enough to know at the time, but as I got more educated, then I was really sure it was pesticides on non-organic fruit, in particular apples. Apples was the first fruit I really noticed this in. And I noticed that at a very young age. I didn't grow up with organic lifestyle in my childhood, but I noticed at a very young age I couldn't handle apples because of this very strange taste. And so I got older and started eating organic. Then I noticed like, oh, I can eat organic apples, right? So I tested it, and sure enough, that came up on my test. So how does this apply to you? What we can do with tests like this that are so cool is it allows us to make lifestyle choices, right? So it's like for me, I know that when I have to prioritize in my life, when I'm traveling, when I'm at people's houses, what I say focus on, what I choose, I know the things that my body has a harder time with. I know the things that I have to choose in order to prevent the buildup of getting the toxins in there to begin with. So we do want to talk about detox, but we also want to talk about prevention and those lifestyle choices we get to make by lowering those things. Because guess what? These toxins do get into the brain. We actually see links in research with certain toxins and things like Alzheimer's, right? So some of these toxins will actually cause plaques, those Alzheimer's plaques. And it's actually thought, one of the theories in some of these research studies is that plaques in the brain, like Alzheimer plaques that are contributing to the disease, actually have an antimicrobial and an antitoxic type of property to it. So it's the toxins getting into the brain that then triggers these plaques to be formed to trap the toxins. Of course, things go wrong and people end up with dementia, right? But so a lot of these processes can come from those kind of things. So what do we do about it? Well, when we're working on brain fog, when we're working on these things, we start working down the chain and go through these layers that we're talking about tonight. Anything from the hormones to the mouth tape and the breathing and the tongue to the infections, as well as to these toxins. And so we can do tests to see what are our genetic predispositions, what are the things that are actually built up in our body, and the things that are actually built up in our body, then we work to get them out. When we understand our genetic predispositions, then we start making better lifestyle choices that are still allow us to be in the world, right? Because we don't have to get everything out, we don't have to be perfect. We just have to know the uniqueness of our body so that we can choose, like, oh, this toxin, probably don't want to do it all the time, but if I encounter it, my body can handle it, versus like this toxin, if I encounter it, my body has a much harder time with it. So that's where I need to spend my time, effort, and energy, that sort of thing. So, how do we get tests like this? This is a question that some people ask. So, I just like throwing this in here. So, unfortunately, and Dr. Gina already kind of started talking about this when talking about like the thyroid and TSH, like, and you might have more to say here in a moment. I'll let you talk around like the insurance nightmare, because one of the things that happens, and I see this a lot in, clients we have, like, oh, I'll go talk to my conventional doctor to order this. One of the things that can happen when we're trying to get these toxin tests, these infection tests, even a good thyroid test, is that so many times doctors are mandated by insurance company as far as what they can order. So if the insurance won't cover it, if the insurance doesn't support it, or if their hospital or supervisor doesn't support it, they don't get to order it. Right. So, and most of these things are not covered by insurance. So, and you get these tests a lot of times through people like us. And I wish it was different. Like, I wish we had this world where you could just go to your standard doctor and be like, I want to get the toxin test for toxin genetic tests. Like, that's hopefully where we're going to get at some point, but that is not where we're at. So it's like something that I think really annoys both patients and clinicians alike. And it's also part of, unfortunately, this nightmare of where we are. So we get them, for better or worse, we get them, you get them through people like us. And so that's your worksheet answer. And then I'm gonna, before I go into this and into next steps, I think you wanted to talk about a story for us too, didn't you?
Yeah, for toxins for sure. Yeah. So, Dr. Diane's talking about our susceptibility to toxins, the toxins in our environment. And so I had this patient, and this was a conventional medicine patient. And he comes to me with a year and a half, 2 years of brain fog, depression. He's got pain all over his body that's just totally random. He's got numbness and tingling. It's just bizarre. He's been to every specialist they had. Nobody can figure it out. And he's a pilot, so he cannot take medications. He cannot be disabled. He's like going to lose his job. This is a big deal. So, the first thing I say to him is, when did it start? And he said, oh, like a year and a half, 2 years ago when we moved into our new house. And I said, well, does the house have mold? And he said, no, no, doc, it doesn't have mold. It's a newer house. I said, oh, okay. And so we went down other paths. We fixed his gut, we fixed his thyroid, we fixed his inflammation. We did all these things and it helped a little bit, but he was still having that brain fog. He was still, depressed, and it just wasn't like him. And so I didn't see him for probably a month or so. And then he comes back and he goes, Doc, I said, yeah. He goes, we tested our house for mold, and behind our walls in our basement, it was covered in black mold. And I was like, oh, well, like I said, that explains it. And it's interesting because not everybody is susceptible to getting that buildup of mold toxins. They're genetically, certain people are more susceptible to that than others. But he was very susceptible to it. He almost lost his job over this. Nobody could figure it out, but it was that simple. Is that he moved into a house that was a newer house, shouldn't have had mold, supposedly, here in Colorado, and it was covered in mold. And so that's something to really keep in mind, is just because you move into a new place doesn't mean it doesn't have mold.
Yeah, and sadly, I feel like that happens way too much of the time, because so often, and just to also emphasize for you guys that are listening, because you might hear this story and be like, oh, well, I had the mold inspector. Like, I imagine that guy might have had a mold inspector, right?
Right.
Yeah, and the mold inspectors, even the certified ones, because the certified ones are not certified in biological impacts of mold. They're certified on how to read their moisture meters correctly. They're certified on how to take samples correctly, right? They're not certified on how the toxins, how to look for the toxins that are making humans sick. And like the really good inspectors, what they're doing is they're not just taking air and comparing it to the outside and the inside. They're collecting dust. They're drilling holes behind the drywall. So in cases, like the pilot that Dr. Gina's talking about, like, like that could have been probably figured out in the beginning if somebody had actually done drywall based samples where they're taking a little speculum and they're sucking the dust out but from behind the drywall and they're testing that and these types of things. So it's one of the hardest things I think we have to tell people is like your house is making you sick because fundamentally our house is supposed to be the safest place that in the world for us. So when it's like we get attacked by the safest place in the world, there's so much PTSD that really comes from that. So it's super big deal. But even worse than like being willing to look at it and being worse than exploring it is ignoring the elephant in the room, you know?
Yeah. Big deal.
Yeah, super big deal. So we're going to talk about a little bit more, you guys. We're going to answer your questions. We're not done yet, but I do know in these, in these webinars that people tend to, especially at this time, need to get to dinner and all that. So, we will give you bonus, but I also want to make sure that you guys have access to this particular QR code you see on the screen. I'm also going to put this in the chat. Essentially what this this is your new patient information. So the way Dr. Gina and I work is in a team-based approach. So that's why we wanted to, do this webinar together too for you guys. So, a lot of times when people do these webinars, it's how do I get this test? How do I find somebody that's going to listen to me? I've seen a dozen different doctors. How do I know you guys are going to find, something different? I can tell you after doing this work for almost 15 years, and you've been a doctor for what, like 20 years now? Is that right?
Yeah.
Something like that? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like combined total of like, 35 plus years we're going on here. And I don't see cases where we miss people. I don't see cases where people come in and they have all of the tests needed. It has happened maybe once or twice, but you know what has happened to those once or twice things? It's like, well, that was never treated, and that was never treated, and that was never treated.
Yep.
So that first, meeting is really like a discovery meeting of like, let's get you some answers. Let's figure out what is happening. And so I do those first meetings, and then Dr. Gina takes over from there. And then we, talk about cases as they are needed to make sure our brains are, both on this. So you get the best of both worlds. And so that QR code, that link in there, essentially is a link for the first patient visit. You can sign up right online. That first patient visit, we do have a busy practice, so we want people that are serious. So that first patient visit is $250. We do take that in advance. So if you book that visit, you'll see my team reach out tomorrow with an invoice to hold your spot because we want to make sure we can help as many people as possible. And so we want people that are going to show up. So we take that in advance. If you change your mind, just let us know within 48 hours of your visit. It's fully refundable. We just need to have time to fill that slot again because we can't help people if people don't show up. So that's really the deal there. But it is there are limitations, of course, in one-on-one care with what we can do. So I definitely spots do go fast. That online booking link will be only active for new patients to book for 24 hours because we don't usually let people book that way. So you basically have 24 hours from this webinar to book that. And of course, let us know if you like have questions. You can always email us as well. And we're happy that we have a great supportive staff. Everybody's happy to help in any sort of thing. But definitely, if you're interested, what's going to happen on the visit, talk about labs. We're going to talk about what you're missing. We're going to put together a treatment plan, including how you get labs, what you can do with them, what's been missing. And it's really just like a step-by-step plan. So most people do choose to work with us after that. But even if you don't, you're going to walk away with like, oh, here's the lab I'm missing, or, oh, here's this I'm missing, or, oh, this is the thing that I never got treated. So regardless, we're going to make that super valuable for you to make sure that you are, you're getting what you paid for. You're really getting value out of your time with us. We hope you'll stay if it's a good fit, but if not, at least you'll have value to, um, to go on for there. So, and then, yeah, follow-up plans, just so you know from there, because people do ask, range generally between $49 to $1,100 a month. So we'll talk. We have a lot of different ways to work with people. So that's always the goal. That after that first visit is to find something that essentially is going to get you where you want in the budget that you have. So that's the other thing to know there is, of course, there's always a follow-up plan. But like I said, the goal is to get you value on that, no matter what. So before I go on, I want to let Dr. Gina tell you a little bit about, tell us about your history and your story, because I think people would really appreciate and give hope and all of that good stuff as well. There's a lot to
Yeah.
the story.
So my story is interesting. When I was in med school, I had 6 months of just fatigue. But of course, when you're in med school, all the med students think they have everything, so they just ignore you. And so it went away. I didn't think anything of it. So 7 years later, all of a sudden I am just so fatigued I cannot function. And this is weird for me because I am a, type A, working 80 hours a week, still coming home and cooking for my kids and reading them a story. I mean, like, this is what I would do, and I couldn't do any of it. I couldn't push them on a swing. I could go to the grocery store, or I could do laundry. That was all I could do in a day. That was it. I was taking Adderall so that I didn't fall asleep at the wheel. I mean, it was ridiculous. And of course, and I knew this, but my conventional med docs were like, I don't know what to tell you, I don't know. And so I ended up connecting with one of our colleagues. And, I'd always been interested in functional medicine, but hadn't had a chance to really look into it. And so, went down that path of, let's do these labs, let's figure out what's going on. And of course, totally different labs than what my conventional training had showed me. And everything was just depleted. Like, my cortisol was all messed up and depleted. My iron was low. My thyroid was low. My B12 was low. I mean, just everything was just a mess, And so we started treating those things. We started working on, diet and exercise. And I got pretty good. I got to the point where it was like, okay, well, I can function. I don't need the Adderall. I'm good, but I was still taking a nap during the day. And it was like, we're missing something here. What are we missing? And so, like we said, I had been working with Dr. Diane for a while, and I said, what am I missing? And she was like, did you test for Lyme? And I'm like, no, although I went to med school in DC, so we had lots of ticks. They were really gross. Okay. And so we tested for Lyme, and sure enough, it was wildly positive, and so it was like, oh, that's the missing piece. So we had fixed all of the problems that the Lyme had caused, but we hadn't fixed the root cause. And that is, we will find again and again with our patients, is until you get to that root cause, just like my story with the pilot, until you get to that root cause, you can fix the other stuff and it'll help. You can fix the gut, you can fix the thyroid, it's great, but you're not going to get rid of it until you actually fix that root problem. And we're not going to get into it tonight, but the Lyme disease is a tough one to treat. But Dr. Diane and I have a lot of experience treating that. And we get better. I got better. And it just is amazing because, going from, being a doctor and being able to work all these hours to being able to do nothing, not even push my kids on a swing, now back to I can live my life again. It's just huge, huge.
Yeah, thank you so much. There's so many, besides even just like, I think empathy and all that. I think there's so many good points in your story. Like, because even people that I think that come to us oftentimes with Lyme, it's so easy to come with these infections and been like, okay, well, I've treated this for 7 years and nothing's getting better. And so sometimes we get this question around like, well, it's kind of back to like, what's the magic supplement? Like, So oftentimes people want to hear about like this magic treatment for Lyme that's going to be so different than everybody else's treatment. And so much of it, like we do offer different solutions, but so much of it is exactly what you said around like it's not just the Lyme, it's fixing all the underlying root things that the Lyme causes. So I think it's a two-part thing. It's like we want to get to the roots and the things we're talking about tonight, the toxins, the infections, all these different things, but we also want to get to the dysfunction that these things cause. And when we're talking about the symptoms we are tonight and the focus around brain fog, cognitive impairment, fatigue, these sorts of things, it really is like it's like a both and sort of thing. This whole thing around like, okay, well, we have to do the Lyme first. We have to do the parasites. There's all the Lyme, there's all the parasites, or all the mold, or it's the thyroid, it's adrenals. It's like, no, it's like just like with your story, it's really, really, truly everything. So again, I hope you guys will come and book with us. Again, what you're going to get is you're going to get a plan. We're going to go through the things. We're going to get a plan. One of the big things beyond a plan you're going to get is hope, because we help so many people in situations like yours. It's so common. People come in and they'll be like, "Oh, I bet I'm the most difficult case like patient you've ever had. Like, and my case must be so complicated." Like, pretty much everybody we see is that complicated, difficult case. So that's really the sense of hope, is like we see people in similar situations get better over and over and over again, and an understanding of how to get the help you need, a roadmap, right? What are the steps, right? The roadmap is like it's unique and it's a guidebook, meaning, hey, here's the ways that we see things work in the direction and the order we see things work most of the time. What makes it unique is your body gives us feedback, and your body says, that's working, or no, it's not. And we take a different direction, but we teach you how to do that. So, this is one of my favorite stories. Is I love when we just get people off so many medications. So this was a woman, Melissa, and basically, when she lost 35 pounds, she got off 4 different things, including a steroid and a very, very addictive benzodiazepine, right? Those are super addictive medications. And that was basically, people need to know that they're worth it. People need to know that it is worth it to get their lives back. And we can't put a time or a price tag on that. And this was another patient of mine. So basically, I had this is about 2 different patients. The first was this power walker. It was very simple. He just came into me because every time he would turn one direction, his hip would kind of go out and it would bother him. And he could turn the other way. He was really into this really fast paced power walking, like 4.5, 5 miles an hour power walking, like practically running. I've tried power walking at that pace. I'm like, this is a little bit crazy. It's real fast from a walking standpoint. It's way easier to run. But essentially this, what he was doing is this particular person is like, couldn't make these turns, hip kept going out. And what wind up happening is we started working on the root cause, and we found a gastrointestinal inflammatory connection, figured out the roots. Whoops, that's the wrong spelling of roots. But essentially, then I had another patient, and this was another patient I only saw him one time, and he decided he didn't want to work on the root, and he just wasn't in it. And I was actually treating his wife, and his wife told me about a year later that in that one year, her husband had 2 hip replacements, 2 carpal tunnel surgeries, and a stent put in. And on top of insurance, he spent $100,000. So why do I tell this story? Because I want you to be the power worker, not Bill. And it's so easy. Sometimes I see it's like, sometimes it just feels like this crazy uphill climb, especially when you've been in the middle of it. I know a lot of you that have been listed, that are listening, have been in the middle of this for a while, where it's like, oh my gosh, I've done so much of this already. It just feels like it's never going to end. But we still want you to be the power walker and not Bill. We still want you to say, okay, if we don't spend it, if we don't put time in it, if we don't do it now, it's like we pay now or we pay later. And unfortunately, sometimes people choose the answer that leads them. It's like, now Bill has 2 carpal tunnel things. He has 2 hip replacements. He has a stent in his heart, and he's a lot, worse off in that way. Okay, so here's the final thing. So now it's Q&A. We really only have one question here, which is about checking melanocyte stimulating hormone. So Please put more questions in because we are wrapping up now. So we want to make sure we answer your questions. As far as melanocyte stimulating hormone, this is a complicated thing, right? Because what we see in like text, right? We see in text as commonly reference ranges of around 0 to 40. And there's other people in the field that treat mold that say like, oh, it's better to push this way higher than that because when we push melanocyte stimulating hormone higher, then we see the thyroid turn on and the adrenals turn on and that sort of thing. I tend to think in my, after like doing this different ways and looking at this, I tend to think that oftentimes we really want MSH, like ideally in like a 30 to 40, kind of that end of the range. Because if we're using it in my, from my standpoint to turn on the thyroid, then we probably haven't fixed the root as to why the thyroid is not working to begin with. So I really think it's important to say, why are we pushing it so high sometimes out of that range? That 30 to 40 is kind of that sweet spot. But then we want to make sure we're doing the work on the thyroid. We're doing all the adrenal work. We're getting rid of the metals and the mold. We're doing all these things that we're talking about. So that's really your answer there. Is there anything you want to wrap up with tonight, Dr. Gina?
Oh, well, we haven't really mentioned this, but when we're talking about the MSH, the infection that really isn't known about in conventional medicine called MARCoNS. And this is a very deep, deep sinus infection with a very resistant staph. And it causes the MSH to go down, as well as can cause all sorts of sinus stuff, and it's very treatable. We can definitely treat it, but it's just nobody knows about it, and this is one of those hidden causes that people don't even know to look for, and that could be a piece of why you feel fatigued, why you feel brain fogged, and it's just one of those things I wish more people knew about.
Yeah, me too. I mean, that one's amazing to me oftentimes for how common it comes up, or even like its sibling infection, MRSA, both of them two very, very resistant forms of staph that like, it's so frequent, right? That we hear things from our patients around like, oh, well, my doctor said that we shouldn't look for that, like after it's positive, because there's no point because it only happens in immunocompromised patients. Well, and that even that term immunocompromised, it's like, well, a lot of people don't have their immune system working as well as it should be, right? It's not from a true medical standpoint of like, okay, somebody has a terminal illness and it's not immunocompromised to that level, but so many people are immunocompromised these days and are getting infection after infection after infection. So it's no wonder we have these, resistant forms of staph running rampant.
Yeah, for sure.
Anything else you want to conclude with in our time today?
Well, I don't know that I have any others. No other questions? You guys are a quiet crowd.
Yeah, quiet group tonight. That's okay. Hopefully, it's because we're answering all of your questions. So, yeah, hope you guys will join us at my Lyme doc. Hope you guys will, come in and let us help you and figure out how to get out of this chronic disease disaster. And regardless, I definitely hope that we at least filled you with stories of recovery and hope. And there's always answers, there's always solutions, no matter what you've been told. We just have to keep doing the investigative research to find the why. So have a great night. Hope to see you at my Lyme Doc and take care until next time.
Definitely. Good night, guys.